So I've made a few of these Sisters of Battle drawings now, and I wanted to go over how I make these more or less. Each one has been a little bit different, but this is kind of the process. I usually started drawing with line work and or tone color blocking to establish big shapes. Here I started with line work, and then I put a silhouette underneath and started carving at the silhouette, trying to imagine where the light sources would be hitting the various surfaces. I try to imagine the components of the figure as simple volumes, so things like spheres and cylinders and cubes or elongated cubes to make rectangles. And I try to imagine what surfaces are going to be receiving what kind of light. And based on that, I establish a kind of hierarchy of light to darks across the image. And so when I feel that I've set up a strong foundation for where the lights and darks are across the image, I go around and essentially just refine everything. Try to blur and smoothen out a lot of the gradients, try to redefine certain edges that get lost, try to add detail and new details like the battle damage you can see here. The challenge becomes keeping it more or less consistent with the logic in terms of light and shadow that was established in the silhouette layer. So I go around and add more detail here and there, but if I'm perfectly honest, I'm feeling that this image is a little bit boring. I could go and add more heraldry or more elements like scopes or laser beams, but yeah, I thought, you know what, let's continue with the Traitor Sisters of Battle, and maybe this time we do a more cookie cutter, generic, quote unquote, Black Legion inspired Sister of Battle. So I started setting out some of the trim along all of the armor pieces using a very dark gray. I usually avoid pure black and pure white for reasons I'll probably touch on later in a video. But for now, I'll go around in a sort of new silhouette layer of spiky trim, adding details that I think look good, and then I'll set the layer to a alpha lock, which allows me to play only within the silhouette that is drawn, and that's how I'll draw highlights and low shadow elements to simulate that kind of metal effect. The tricky thing about metal is that the specular is higher. Specular is a fancy way of saying the contrast. So usually your darks are going to be darker and your lights are going to be lighter on metal depending on how reflective the surface is. So here I'll just go around adding all the spiky bits and horns and all the shiny little pieces of metal until I get to the colorizing. And coloring this image was a little bit of a challenge because the armor is black, and black is usually neutral or a reflection of whatever is in the atmosphere. So if the figure is in an orange atmosphere, it's going to be a kind of orange tint. I don't really have a perfect way of doing this. I kind of just keep playing around with color until I get something that gives the illusion of black. Around here, I took a step back and thought that the image could use a little bit of variety in terms of visual interest. And to complement all the spiky bits, I thought introducing some circular lenses would be really nice. And for fixes, I usually just go around and adjust little things that are catching my eye and kind of bothering me. Maybe little strands of hair could be a little bit more defined here or there, or this spike is a little bit crooked or not crooked enough, etc., etc. Doing fixes can be fun, but it can also be stressful because you have all these ideas that you wanted to get into the image, and now some of them might not be working, so you either have to let them go and save them for later or really wrestle with them to try to make them work, and even then they might not work. It really depends. And here I'm doing something that I usually do, which is try to separate the pieces in space. The torso and head are closer to us than the backpack, so sometimes I'll separate those pieces off and add maybe a blur or adjust the lighting and contrast on the backpack separately from the helmet to try to make the helmet and torso really pop against the backpack. And while drawing this, I started to imagine this figure could be in the middle of a battlefield that's on fire. So I thought maybe adding some yellow in the background and some in the foreground to imply that maybe they're looking at something on fire would be really neat. And here it is. Thanks for watching.